All right, the time has come to take the PMO EFI engine off the test stand. I've done all the configuration that I can do. Last time I left off with auto control valve wasn't working, but I've since got that configured correctly. So I'm going to show you guys what's involved with incorporating this wire harness from Technica Racewire into the car. This is a standalone ECU. It's the Emtron right here, SL6. It replaces the previous ECU that I had in the car, which is the motronic. And that wiring has come out. This is going to replace it. And this wire harness kind of runs in parallel with the existing wire harness in the car. So I'll show you guys what's involved and what gets connected to this old connector versus everything else, which is essentially brand new. The Technica Racewire basically has this new fuse panel, which has circuits for the fuel pump, the injectors, the coil-on plugs, the idle control valve, and the ECU itself. And that is the critical stuff to make your drivetrain run. What's old is going to be what's on this connector, and these are basically at this point just sensors. It's the oil pressure sensor, it's the oil temperature sensor, it's the oil level gauge, I think, and that's just about it. So some of this could be streamlined in the future, but for now we're just going to keep it the stock 14-pin connector and incorporate that into the existing wire harness in the car. So let's pull the car in and pull this wire harness off. So this is it in its entirety. This is the entire wire harness and fuse box. Everything has terminals on it except for a couple wires, and that's what gets integrated into the car. This one that's been stripped is basically the only wire that I had connected to make this run on the test stand. This is the switched power to the ECU. That's pretty much everything it needs to turn this whole thing on. Another one is a check engine light, and this is for the tachometer. I didn't have either of those connected on the test stand. And then the only other thing is this long lead here, and this is what powers the fuel pump. And this is fully protected with fuse and relay here in that box. So it looks like a lot, and it is a lot of connectors, but it's all been engineered to kind of plug and play. All we have to do is connect it to switch power, which in the car is like a yellow wire under the dash. Ta-da! So the ECU is going to go here behind the seat. You can see there's the old connector of the old motronic. I'm going to leave the car here in the middle of the garage so I can have the door open, probably take the seat out, get all the wiring done under the dash, and then we'll go ahead and put it up on the lift and do the wiring underneath and in the engine bay. I think that'll be easier. Yes, these seats are pretty light. Rennsport dirt. This is when I went camping at Rennsport, I got all that sort of grass and stuff in here. It's under the seat, haven't cleaned it. But importantly is this is where I had the motronic system before. It was right there on the kind of rear footwell. And these are my custom seat mounts, you know, that are lowered and all that stuff. This is what the wire that comes out of the ECU and it goes into the tunnel. And I made that conduit, which is loose. There's a screw right there that holds it in. Those wires come up here to the front of the car. And so this is quite a bit more than what the TRW harness has. This has a wire direct to the battery. This is what powers the fuel injectors. This is switched power, the dash tachometer, and some of these aren't used. This is the fuel pump. This connector connects right here with this one. And I had that going into the smuggler's box where my battery is. So in order to get that connector through this conduit, we have to depopulate the connectors. These are pin extractors, and this is the trick to get the pins out of the connector body. So this slides over the pin. And it's as simple as that. It doesn't damage the pins. There's some little things, like I call them foxtails. We can bend those back out so they reconnect into the body. But now we can go ahead and pull this thing through and get it out of the car. This is to keep the wire from rubbing on the shift linkage or the emergency brake or any other throttle linkage, anything that moves in the tunnel. We don't want it to cut through the wires. So this is designed to keep the wiring down on the floor, and then it runs alongside this side of the tunnel on the passenger side. That's where nothing moves. That's where the factory wire harness is. You could route it here, like under the carpet and stuff, but you know, I don't have carpet. So that's why I made this special conduit. These tools are super helpful. We'll go ahead and put the connector back together. This is an uncut factory harness out of a Carrera. So like these terminations are the factory terminations. All this stuff is the factory way. So we'll go ahead and look at my picture and just reconnect this. It's real easy. So with a razor blade, we can just slide it underneath those little tangs, and that's what retains it in the connector. So we just bend those out a little bit. The black purple is the second to the left. Snap that in. Here's the last one. So that takes a lot less time than cutting and splicing the connector, and it's much more robust than splices. This is probably an $800 harness. So if this was cut, it would be like a $400 harness. So please don't mess with the factory harnesses if you don't have to. So this is just a plate that I used to mount the old ECU. The new ECU is quite a bit smaller, and I didn't drill any holes in the car. This is just like the luggage strap or some kind of seat strap. I'm not sure what these pieces are, but these are the two factory locations. And then the Emtron has this bracket here that has these removable holders. So it's much nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and secure it kind of arbitrarily here. And then depending how the wire lengths are, we can trim down this bracket and make it a little bit better. But for now, let's just get something mounted and then we'll go from there. Okay, I don't think this is going to work because of the way the hole is right here. So I'm going to shift it over to that hole just so the harness can come through. That doesn't look right. Okay, that's a good placeholder for this right now. I mean, it's pretty firm, but we don't need this big chunk over here, or at least I don't think we do. So we can fine tune this later on. I'm just not sure if we want to route these connectors, you know, maybe sideways or down or up. Up is probably not the best because if anything brushes into it, it could damage the pins or something like that. And then if you're wondering why I'm not putting it here on the floor, it's really because of these seat mounts. These are extra strong seat mounts. I actually like them a lot. It lowers my seats down all the way to the floor, and they're very strong. So that's the good news. The bad news is it's hard to get the wiring underneath them because they're basically on the floor. I can't even put my finger through there. So you can't get the wiring here. And then if you could put it right here, but it's susceptible to, you know, things running into it and water collecting here on the floor. So I think that's probably the best place to put it. Last time I had this little bracket to hold the wire along here, and then it made like a loop up to there. So we'll see what looks best. Okay, I'm back here in the engine bay now because the harness, you know, it's all integrated. So this piece is not going to pass through the hole in the car. So I think it might be best to mount this here on the firewall. Just trying to get the lengths figured out right here. Okay, so this is the rough kind of state of affairs. This is everything connects to the engine. I have this guy mounted horizontally. I don't know if that's the best way, but I found it a little bit too long to mate with the curvature here on the inside of the engine bay. So it kind of fits best here. I haven't drilled a hole there or anything. It's just going in the original hole kind of there on the panel. So that locates that right there. This has plenty of length to get to all the engine bits. There's space back here to tuck a lot of those wires, tuck them in behind that rear cross member. So I think we can do a good job hiding most of these wires. And then over here, it's routed under the car, you know, loosely under the car. And then it comes out the hole. I was able to get these big connectors through that hole, no problem. And this is what it looks like on the ECU. And my concern is that this is snaggable. Like you could yank it or crunch it or break the pins or do some damage. So I don't think this is the right routing. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the ECU upside down and see if that routes any better. Yeah, this is probably what I'm gonna end up with. I ended up trying it upside down and it's just too much strain on the connectors. So I decided to put it sideways, and I think that's gonna be its happy place. And then I did end up attaching it here to the corner. This is an old clamp, I'll get a new one. But that just keeps this tucked in so it can't really get, you know, pulled away. You want it to be up against the body as tight as possible. Maybe I can put another one kind of right here where the logo is, or I can zip tie it together. But I think that's gonna be where it's gonna be. And then this is the piece that goes to the dash, and I can just keep it tucked in there, maybe a little bit of seam sealer on it, and then it's gonna go underneath. It easily goes underneath the seat mounts. I can just zip tie it to the seat mounts, and then it's gonna go into the tunnel right there. Okay, here's how it looks under the car. A little hard to film in this area, but this is the main bundle. It comes just below the shock here, just forward of the shock. And I'll put a clamp to kind of keep this. This is a hot heater duct here. So I think I can put a clamp from this M6 stud over to here and just keep that away from the heater. And then it's gonna travel. There's a little clamp right there. I think I added that clamp for the other harness. But it's gonna run along there, and it's going to stay out of the way of the suspension arm and go directly into this hole here on the body. So if you're wondering why this hole is, on the Carrera, the hole is closer to the side, but this is a 74, so this is the old fuel pump bracket that I left in there. Right now it's holding the fuel filter. So that's why the hole is shifted this way a little bit, so the harness can make its way into the cabin. And then this is the grommet that TRW provided. It's not bad. It would need to be screwed into the car. And then there's an inner and outer grommet. The factory grommet is this guy right here. And it is split, but I could basically put this in. It's got some nice strain relief on that side. It does fit this hole because that's how I had it before with the motronic harness. So I think I'm gonna go this route as opposed to this one. I just don't feel like having those screws poking through. The other wire is this big heavy wire. This one goes direct to the starter. So you can see this lead here is to the battery. This lead will go right to that terminal on the starter, and that's where it pulls all the power for the injectors and stuff. It comes right off the starter area. And then over here, this is the wiring I'd done previously. This is for the hard start relay on my starter. I have a relay in there. So just leave that alone. Yeah, I think that is how it should be. Okay, I think I've done all I can do underneath here. I have the harness coming in around this heater can. I put a grommet there or a clamp there so it keeps it away from this moving mechanism. and it also keeps the heat away from it. And then it goes up here tight against the body. There's these two tabs that are sort of pushing it up against there. And then I made a little S-turn here over the fuel pump, or over the fuel filter, I should say. And then it goes in a nice kind of path here through the body into the footwell. So that's that branch. It has the fuel pump wire in it as well. And then the other branch is this heavy gauge wire. This guy here is what goes to the starter. So it looks like it's going to be plenty long enough. I have it tracked here with the factory harnesses, and there was already a clamp here, so I just put that inside it, and I'll trim this little tag right there. So we really want to make sure that this one has a nice clean path up to that fuse box. So remember, that's where the fuse box is, so that wire is probably the most critical one. So we definitely want to make sure it's routed smoothly here. This clutch cable is not going to be there, so that'll come down. So inside here, this is where the wiring came into the previous motronic. So I had, these wires were connected to these wires, and it was via that connector that I took the pins out and stuff. So basically what happens is this wire here comes up into this area of the trunk where I've spliced into this yellow wire. Now this yellow wire comes right from the ignition switch. This is the switch power, and I just added in a secondary wire. The wire does not need to be this big. The wire that goes to the Emtron is just to switch on a relay. So this yellow wire is going to continue down here into the tunnel. This is it right here. So we need to make that connection to one of the wires in the TRW harness. And then the other wire is this one right here. This is for the tachometer. This is a black and green, but that is routed up here into the gauges. So this is connected to my tachometer. It goes back there. Lots of things still unconnected there, so excuse the mess, but we're kind of doing one thing at a time. And then the third wire, I'll probably end up using a connector, but I can run it through this sheathing. That's going to be for the check engine light. And the check engine light is just going to work on one of the existing light locations. For instance, right here is probably a good one. I can do this oil pressure light. Oil pressure is the most important thing. So if the check engine light wants to turn the oil pressure light on, it can. I can make it so that it blinks if there's a check engine, versus oil pressure would be like a solid light. But the Emtron will control that light. There's also this generator light down here. We can maybe use that. There's a couple other places, maybe on the speedometer, there's a little light, but most likely I'll wire it into the oil light. That way there, if something is majorly wrong, it'll flash the oil light. That means I should check it out. And then I took the emergency brake off so that I can show you how this conduit snakes right underneath. It snakes right underneath the shift rod. So the shift rod's not connected right now because the transmission's out. But the rod is, up, it's lifted up off of the conduit like that. Okay, I might have come to a little stopping point here because these wires are not long enough to go to the fuel pump. This is the one labeled fuel pump. It's not gonna go past the pedals, let alone into the fuel tank area. And that's where my fuel pump is. So now it makes sense to extend this wire now before I have to work, on my back underneath there. So it looks like this is the correct wire gauge for the red wire. So I'm going to go ahead and extend that. We'll pull that through all the way out to the trunk area. But I don't have the correct wire gauge for these. And I was going to use this connector right here. This is a 4-pin connector, but I would rather that connector be accessible there through that hole. So I just need to extend these a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and put the connector to replace that flat connector there. And that'll run down into the tunnel area, so it'll be nice and tidy. I'd like to keep it color-coded just to stay with the right documentation that Technica Racewire provided. So that's the correct open barrel splice. I'm going to put some heat shrink on that. This is the wire sleeving that I have, and it's just a little bit too small to fit over the wire. It's meant for something thinner. And then this one will fit, but it's too short. So I need to get some extra sheathing, and it probably makes sense to use this fiberglass stuff that TRW has. This really needs to be a lot longer, and I'd like to keep the same materials as much as possible. Sorry I was unable to finish this video, but this is the way it goes. A lot of working on cars, especially custom stuff, is all about discovery and overcoming the challenges. And if you don't have the materials, it's best to wait and get the right stuff. As usual, thank you all for tuning in. I'll overcome those little wiring obstacles and we'll be hopefully ready to put the engine in next week.